The mahogany conference table gleamed under the pristine lighting of Mount Sinai's VIP consultation room as Park Ji-won sat rigid in the leather chair, his tailored Armani suit immaculate, despite the devastating news echoing in his ears. Dr. Richard Richardson stood with his back to the windows overlooking Central Park, his Harvard diploma catching the afternoon light as he delivered the verdict that would shatter everything. Mr. Park, we've exhausted every conventional treatment protocol. Richardson's voice carried the weight of institutional authority that Ji-won had always revered in men like him. White, prestigious, connected to the medical elite that his billions could buy. Your neurological syndrome is progressing faster than anticipated. The cellular deterioration in your brain tissue is unprecedented. From the corner of the room, Dr. Loretta Chambers rose from her chair, her golden skin radiant against the pristine white lab coat, natural hair pulled back in a professional bun that framed her determined features. She held a thick medical journal in her hands, pages marked with meticulous annotations. There's an experimental protocol I've been developing specifically for this type of rapid neurological degradation. Excuse me, Ji-won interrupted without even glancing in her direction, his piercing eyes fixed solely on Richardson, the family signet ring on his pinky finger catching the light as he gestured dismissively. Dr. Richardson, surely there are other specialists available. Men with extensive experience in similar cases, perhaps at Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic. Min-seo Kim stood silently by the door, her tablet clutched against her chest, her sophisticated glasses reflecting her embarrassment at her boss's behavior as she watched Dr. Chambers' confident posture remain unshakable despite the public rejection. Mr. Park, Dr. Chambers' voice cut through the tension with surgical precision, her tone professional but unmistakably firm. I am the only physician in this hospital, possibly in the entire United States, who has published peer-reviewed research on experimental neurological reversal therapy for your specific condition. Ji-won finally turned to look at her, his sweeping gaze automatically cataloging. Woman, black, too young to be taken seriously, despite her undeniable beauty and obvious medical expertise. His lips curved into the condescending smile that had always worked for him in boardrooms and corporate negotiations. Thank you for the consultation. Dr. Richardson will continue to handle my case exclusively. The heart monitor attached to Ji-won's chest began beeping frantically as his pulse spiked, but he maintained his dismissive expression, twisting his signet ring nervously, a tell that Min-seo had learned to recognize over years of service. Dr. Chambers placed the medical journal on the table with deliberate calm, the pages falling open to reveal charts and data that could save his life. Mr. Park, pride is a luxury you can no longer afford. The silence that followed was broken only by the increasingly urgent beeping of the heart monitor, as if the machine itself was warning that his prejudice might be the very thing that kills him. If your life depended on the person you despised most, would you swallow your pride to survive? Most of our listeners aren't subscribed to the channel yet, so if you're enjoying this story of transformation and want us to create more compelling narratives like this one, please hit that subscribe button to encourage us to keep bringing you these powerful stories. 3 days earlier, Park Ji-won had been untouchable. The CEO of Park Industries commanded respect in every boardroom from Seoul to Manhattan, his technology conglomerate worth more than the GDP of small nations. At 42, he possessed everything that mattered in his world: power, wealth, and the unwavering deference of everyone around him. The first symptoms appeared during a merger presentation to Goldman Sachs executives. A slight tremor in his left hand, dismissed as stress. Then the words began to blur together on the presentation slides, his usually razor-sharp mind suddenly foggy. But Park Ji-won had not built an empire by showing weakness. "Schedule an appointment with the best neurologist money can buy," he instructed Min Seo as his private jet descended toward JFK. "Someone from Harvard Medical, or Johns Hopkins. I want American medicine, not some second-rate doctor." Min Seo's research had led them to Mount Sinai, where Dr. Richardson's impressive credentials and Ivy League pedigree made him the obvious choice. The consultation fee of $50,000 barely registered. It was the cost of certainty, of placing his life in the hands of someone who looked like success. What Ji-won hadn't expected was Dr. Loretta Chambers. She had been present during his initial examination, taking notes, asking precise questions about his symptoms that demonstrated an intimate understanding of neurological conditions. But every time she spoke, Ji-won directed his answers to Richardson, treating her as if she were a particularly persistent nurse. "The progression pattern suggests a rare autosomal variant," Dr. Chambers had noted, her voice steady despite being repeatedly ignored. "I've seen similar cases in my research on experimental neurological therapies." Ji-won had smiled politely and asked Richardson, "Doctor, what do you think about the progression timeline?" Now, as he sat in the VIP room receiving Richardson's devastating prognosis, Ji-won realized he had made the gravest error of his life. The woman he had dismissed held the key to his survival, and his arrogance might have just locked that door forever. The words hit Ji-won like a physical blow. Richardson's voice seemed to come from underwater as he explained the rapid deterioration of neural pathways, the cellular breakdown that no conventional treatment could stop. 72 hours, possibly less, Richardson said, his Harvard-trained composure cracking slightly. "I've consulted with colleagues at Mayo, at Johns Hopkins. We're dealing with something that's simply beyond current medical understanding." Min Seo's tablet clattered to the floor as her hands began to shake. She had worked for Ji-won for 6 years, had seen him conquer impossible business deals and hostile takeovers. But this was different. This was mortality, raw and undeniable. Dr. Chambers remained standing in the corner, her medical journal still open to the pages of research that could change everything. She watched Ji-won's face cycle through the stages of disbelief, denial, anger, bargaining. She had seen it countless times before, but never with stakes this high, or with a patient whose prejudices ran this deep. "There has to be something." Ji-won's voice cracked for the first time since entering the hospital. "Experimental treatments, clinical trials. I can pay any amount." Richardson shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward Dr. Chambers before returning to his patient. "Mr. Park, there are unconventional approaches, but they would require you to place your trust in methods that haven't been approved by the FDA." "Whatever it takes," Ji-won said immediately. "Contact the best experimental medicine specialists, Harvard, Stanford, wherever." Dr. Chambers finally stepped forward, her confidence undiminished despite the hours of being treated as invisible. "Mr. Park, I am that specialist. The research you're looking for is sitting right here." She gestured to the journal, pages filled with data that represented years of groundbreaking work. Ji-won's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. Everything in his worldview rebelled against the idea that this woman, young, black, female, could possess knowledge that the prestigious Dr. Richardson lacked. But the monitor's relentless beeping reminded him that ideology was a luxury dying men couldn't afford. The room fell silent except for the mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor, counting down the seconds of a life that hung in the balance of pride versus survival. The cardiac arrest came without warning. One moment, Ji-won was arguing with Richardson about second opinions. The next, he was convulsing violently as every monitor in the VIP room erupted in alarms. The flatline scream of the EKG cut through the chaos like a death knell. Richardson froze, his hands hovering uselessly over the crash cart as nurses flooded into the room. Years of prestigious training had not prepared him for this moment. When academic credentials meant nothing, and only raw medical instinct mattered. Dr. Chambers moved with lightning precision. She pushed past Richardson, her hands already reaching for the defibrillator paddles as she barked orders with an authority that commanded instant obedience. "Get me 2 milligrams of epinephrine and prepare for intracardiac injection, now." "Dr. Chambers, perhaps we should follow standard protocol," Richardson began. "Standard protocol will kill him," she shot back, placing the paddles on Ji-won's chest with expert positioning. "His neurological condition is causing cardiac episodes that textbook medicine can't handle. Clear." The electricity jolted through Ji-won's body, but the flatline continued its monotonous scream. "Doctor." Chambers checked his pulse, felt nothing, and immediately began compressions with a technique Richardson had never seen. Her hands moved in a specific pattern, applying pressure to points that seemed unrelated to standard CPR. "What are you doing?" Richardson demanded. "Neurological resuscitation," Dr. Chambers replied without breaking rhythm. "When the brain's electrical system fails, you have to restart it differently. This is experimental technique I've been developing for exactly this type of case." Min-seo watched in horror and fascination as the woman her boss had dismissed as unworthy now fought desperately to save his life. Each compression seemed calculated, precise, as if Dr. Chambers understood Ji-won's failing body better than he understood it himself. After what felt like an eternity, the monitor suddenly beeped. Then again. A weak rhythm appeared on the screen, growing stronger with each beat. Ji-won's eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear replacing the arrogance that had defined him for so long. Dr. Chambers stepped back, sweat beading on her forehead, her golden skin glistening under the harsh hospital lights. She had just performed a medical miracle, using techniques that existed only in her research papers. Ji-won's first words were barely a whisper. "You saved me." The aftermath of the cardiac arrest left Ji-won vulnerable in ways he had never experienced. Lying in the hospital bed, connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat, he was forced to confront a reality that shattered his worldview. The woman he had dismissed as insignificant had just prevented his death using methods that the prestigious Dr. Richardson didn't even understand. Richardson stood awkwardly by the window, his authority diminished by his failure to act decisively during the crisis. The Harvard diploma on the wall seemed to mock him as he watched Dr. Chambers efficiently check Ji-won's vital signs and adjust the medication dosages. "The experimental treatment I mentioned earlier," Dr. Chambers said, her voice professional but firm. "It's specifically designed for patients with your neurological profile who experience cardiac complications." She pulled up a chair beside his bed, treating him as a human being rather than a billionaire patron. Ji-won struggled with the words, his pride warring with the undeniable evidence of her competence. "Dr. Richardson said there were no viable options." "Dr. Richardson is an excellent physician for conventional cases," Dr. Chambers replied diplomatically. "But your condition requires expertise in experimental neurological therapy. I've spent the last 5 years developing protocols specifically for cases like yours." Min-seo approached cautiously, her tablet containing research she had been quietly conducting. "Sir, I took the liberty of reviewing Dr. Chambers' published work. She has 17 peer-reviewed papers on neurological reversal therapy, including 3 that directly relate to your symptoms." The betrayal Ji-won felt was complex. Not just that his trusted assistant had researched behind his back, but that she had found evidence of Dr. Chambers' expertise that he had been too prejudiced to see. His signet ring felt heavy on his finger, a symbol of inherited privilege that meant nothing in the face of genetic disease. "I don't understand," Ji-won admitted, the words foreign on his tongue. "If you have the knowledge to help me, why didn't Dr. Richardson mention your research?" Dr. Chambers exchanged a meaningful look with Richardson, who cleared his throat uncomfortably. The politics of medicine, like the politics of business, were often about who received credit and who remained invisible. "Sometimes," Dr. Chambers said carefully, "the best solutions come from unexpected sources." The heart monitor continued its steady rhythm, a reminder that his life depended not on the doctor he had chosen, but on the one he had refused to see. The revelation came like a scalpel through silk. Min Seo had spent the night combing through medical databases, her loyalty to Ji-won finally overcoming her deference to his prejudices. What she discovered about Dr. Richardson's track record was devastating. "Sir," she said hesitantly, approaching his bedside with her tablet displaying damning statistics. "I found Dr. Richardson's success rates, with neurological cases similar to yours." Her voice dropped to a whisper. 0 survivors in the past 3 years. Ji-won's blood pressure spiked as he processed the information. The man he had entrusted with his life, chosen specifically for his Ivy League credentials and authoritative demeanor, had been systematically failing patients with his exact condition. Dr. Chambers entered the room carrying a fresh medical chart, her professional composure intact despite the tension crackling through the air. She had overheard Min Seo's revelation, and her expression suggested she wasn't surprised. "You knew," Ji-won said, his voice barely controlled. "You knew Richardson couldn't help me, and you let me choose him anyway." Dr. Chambers set down the chart and met his gaze directly. "Mr. Park, I tried to tell you about my research during our first consultation. You dismissed me without listening to a single word." Her tone remained professional, but there was steel beneath the diplomacy. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Ji-won remembered that first meeting, how he had automatically assumed Richardson's superiority, how he had treated Dr. Chambers as if she were furniture rather than a physician. The memory was suddenly, painfully clear. Dr. Richardson's approach is traditional, conservative, Dr. Chambers continued. He follows established protocols that work well for conventional cases. But your condition requires innovation, risk-taking, and frankly, techniques that haven't been approved by medical boards yet. Richardson himself appeared in the doorway, having obviously heard the conversation. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Dr. Chambers, I think you're being unfair. Medical practice requires proven methodologies, not experimental methodologies that saved his life 12 hours ago." Dr. Chambers interrupted, her voice sharp with suppressed frustration. "While you stood frozen, unable to adapt to a situation your textbooks didn't cover." The silence that followed was brutal. Ji-won realized he was witnessing more than a professional disagreement. This was about competence versus credentials, substance versus appearance. And he had chosen the wrong side, based on nothing more than his own biases. The heart monitor beeped steadily, counting down the hours he had left to make a choice that could save or damn him. Dr. Chambers' research laboratory was unlike anything Ji-won had expected. Hidden away in the basement levels of Mount Sinai, it looked more like a high-tech pharmaceutical facility than a traditional medical research space. Screens displayed complex molecular structures, while centrifuges hummed with samples that represented years of groundbreaking work. "The treatment protocol I've developed is called neurological pathway reconstruction," Dr. Chambers explained, her hands moving gracefully over the equipment. "It involves introducing modified cellular material directly into the brain tissue to halt and reverse the deterioration you're experiencing." Ji-won listened from his wheelchair, still weak from the cardiac episode, but desperate to understand. Billionaire stood beside him, taking notes with the dedication of someone who finally understood the stakes. The experimental nature of the treatment should have terrified him, but instead, he felt a strange sense of hope. The FDA hasn't approved these methods, Dr. Chambers continued honestly. I've had success with similar cases in clinical trials, but using this treatment on you would be medically and legally risky. Her golden skin seemed to glow under the laboratory lights as she spoke with passionate intensity about her work. What kind of risks? Ji-won asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Complete neurological shutdown, Dr. Chambers replied without hesitation. If the treatment fails, you die within hours instead of days. But if it works... She pulled up brain scans on the main screen showing before and after images of previous patients. Complete recovery. Full restoration of neurological function. The images were stunning. Brain tissue that had appeared dark and deteriorated in the before scans showed bright, healthy neural activity in the after images. It was like watching resurrection at the cellular level. How many patients have you tried this on? Mincio asked quietly. 7, Dr. Chambers answered. 6 complete recoveries. 1 failure. She paused, her professional composure slipping slightly. The failure was a 73-year-old man whose condition was more advanced than yours. The treatment simply came too late. Ji-won studied the brain scans, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with his lifelong assumptions about medical authority. This woman, whom he had dismissed as unqualified, had developed a treatment that could save his life using science that was years ahead of conventional medicine. Dr. Richardson would never approve this, he said. Dr. Richardson doesn't have to, Dr. Chambers replied, meeting his gaze directly. The decision is yours, Mr. Park, but you need to make it soon. Your window for treatment is closing rapidly. The laboratory fell silent, except for the hum of machinery that could either save his life or end it. The phone call came at 3 a.m. Chairwoman Park Sun-ja's voice crackled across the international line from Seoul, sharp with the authority that had built a corporate dynasty. She had learned about her son's condition through channels that bypassed his carefully maintained privacy. You will return to Korea immediately, she commanded in Korean, her words carrying the weight of generational expectations. Dr. Kim at Samsung Medical Center is prepared to treat you. I won't have my son treated by inferior medical personnel. Ji-won sat up in his hospital bed, the movement sending waves of weakness through his deteriorating nervous system. Through the window of his VIP suite, he could see Manhattan's skyline glittering in the pre-dawn darkness. The distance between his mother's world and his current reality felt impossibly vast. Mother, the situation is more complex than you understand, he replied carefully in English, aware that Dr. Chambers might be listening from the hallway. The treatment I need is available here. From that black woman? Chairwoman Park's voice dripped with disdain. I've had her investigated. She's nobody, Ji-won. No family connections, no prestigious medical lineage. Her father was a mechanic who died in some charity hospital. The casual cruelty of his mother's words hit Ji-won like a physical blow. He suddenly understood that Dr. Chambers had faced this kind of dismissal her entire career, that her competence had been questioned not because of her abilities, but because of her race. The realization made him ashamed of his own assumptions. Her qualifications are impeccable, he found himself saying. She's published more research on neurological conditions than anyone else in the hospital. Research means nothing without proper connections, Chairwoman Park snapped. Return home immediately. The family's reputation cannot survive the scandal of you being treated by some experimental procedure. Dr. Chambers appeared in the doorway, holding his latest test results. Her expression was carefully neutral, But Ji-won could see she had overheard at least part of the conversation. The shame he felt was overwhelming, not just for his mother's words, but for his own years of similar thinking. "I have to go," he told his mother, ending the call before she could respond. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. "Mr. Park," Dr. Chambers said gently, approaching his bedside with the test results. "Your neurological deterioration has accelerated. If we're going to proceed with the experimental treatment, we need to begin within the next 12 hours. Ji-won looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time. He saw not just a doctor, but a woman who had dedicated her life to saving people like him, despite facing prejudice at every turn. The choice before him was no longer just about medical treatment. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be. The boardroom at Park Industries' Manhattan office had been converted into a makeshift war room. Min-seo had assembled Ji-won's most trusted advisors via secure video conference, their faces filling multiple screens as they debated his medical crisis. The irony wasn't lost on him. These same people who would trust him with billion-dollar decisions now questioned his judgment about his own survival. "Sir, the potential lawsuits alone could destroy the company," his legal counsel warned from Seoul. "If this experimental treatment fails, the media scrutiny will be devastating. The family's reputation will survive my death better than my association with an unproven black doctor." Ji-won finished bitterly. The words tasted like poison in his mouth, but he had learned to recognize the ugly truth of his world's priorities. "Doctor." Chambers sat quietly in the corner of the room, her presence both crucial and invisible to everyone except Ji-won. She had agreed to attend this meeting at his request, though he could see the discomfort in her professional demeanor. This was her expertise being debated by people who had never opened a medical textbook. "Dr. Chambers," Ji-won said, his voice cutting through the corporate chatter. "Please explain your success rate to my advisors." She stood gracefully, her confidence unshaken despite the hostile environment. "The neurological pathway reconstruction protocol has achieved complete recovery in 6 out of 7 cases involving Mr. Park's specific condition. The treatment targets the cellular breakdown at its source and reverses the damage within 72 to 96 hours. "And if it fails?" asked his chief financial officer. "Mr. Park dies," Dr. Chambers replied without hesitation. "But without treatment, he dies anyway. The difference is that my protocol offers a genuine chance of survival and complete recovery." The silence that followed was deafening. Ji-won watched his advisors' faces on the screens, seeing the same prejudice he had harbored reflected in their expressions. They couldn't reconcile their image of medical authority with the reality of Dr. Chambers' expertise. "What about Dr. Richardson's recommendation?" someone asked. "Dr. Richardson has recommended palliative care," Ji-won said flatly. "He's essentially advising me to die comfortably." Min-seo stepped forward, her loyalty finally overcoming corporate hierarchy. "Sir, I've reviewed Dr. Chambers' research extensively. Her work is groundbreaking. She's ahead of the medical establishment by years, possibly decades." The young assistant's endorsement seemed to carry more weight than Ji-won had expected. Several advisors shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that Min-seo's judgment had proven reliable in countless business situations. Dr. Chambers remained standing, her golden skin luminous under the conference room lights, representing both his salvation and the shattering of everything he had believed about worthiness and competence. The choice was no longer just medical. It was moral. The moment of decision came at dawn. Ji-won sat alone in his hospital bed, watching the sun rise over Central Park as his body continued its relentless deterioration. The tremor in his hands had worsened overnight, and his vision had begun to blur at the edges. Time was running out faster than anyone had predicted. Dr. Chambers knocked softly before entering, carrying the consent forms for the experimental treatment. Her professional composure couldn't quite hide the urgency in her movements. She knew as well as he did that this might be his final opportunity. "The treatment has to begin within the next 2 hours," she said, setting the paperwork on his bedside table. "Your neural pathways are degrading too rapidly to wait any longer." Ji-won stared at the forms, knowing that his signature would represent more than medical consent. It would be an admission that everything he had believed about racial hierarchies and professional competence had been catastrophically wrong. His signet ring caught the morning light, a symbol of inherited privilege that had nearly cost him his life. "Dr. Chambers," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." She sat down beside his bed, her attention fully focused on him. "Of course. Why are you willing to risk your career to save someone who treated you so poorly?" The question had tormented him through the sleepless night. "You could let Dr. Richardson handle my case. No one would blame you." Dr. Chambers was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. "Because saving lives is why I became a doctor," she said finally. "Not saving some lives, all lives, even the lives of people who don't see my worth." The simple dignity of her answer shattered the last of his resistance. Ji-won realized he was in the presence of someone whose character surpassed his own in every meaningful way. She had dedicated her life to healing, while he had built walls of prejudice. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words inadequate but necessary. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry for not seeing who you really are." Dr. Chambers nodded acceptance of his apology, then reached for the consent forms. "Mr. Park, I need you to understand the risks. If this treatment fails, you won't have time for goodbyes. Your family, your business affairs, everything needs to be in order." Ji-won took the pen with shaking hands, the tremor making his signature barely legible. But the decision was clear, crystalline in its simplicity. He would place his life in the hands of the most competent doctor he had ever met, regardless of the color of her skin. As he signed his name, Ji-won felt something shift inside him, not just medically, but fundamentally. He was no longer the man who had walked into Mount Sinai 5 days ago. The preoperative preparation felt like a ritual of transformation. As Dr. Chambers and her team prepared the experimental treatment, Ji-won found himself compelled to make amends for a lifetime of assumptions. The weight of his prejudices had become unbearable, especially knowing that his survival depended on the person he had most wronged. Min-seo sat beside his bed, her tablet forgotten as she watched her employer grapple with emotions he had never allowed himself to feel. She had seen Ji-won negotiate billion-dollar deals without flinching, but now he seemed vulnerable and almost childlike in his uncertainty. "I need to call my mother," Ji-won said suddenly. "She needs to understand what kind of doctor is treating me." "Sir, your mother was quite clear about her feelings regarding Dr. Chambers," Min-seo replied carefully. "Are you sure you want to have that conversation now?" Ji-won nodded, his resolve strengthening. "I've spent my entire life seeking the approval of people who taught me to see the world through their prejudices. It's time to stop." The call connected after several rings. Chairwoman Park's voice was sharp with disapproval when she recognized her son's number. "Ji-won, please tell me you've reconsidered this foolishness and returned to Seoul." "Mother, I'm about to undergo treatment that could save my life," Ji-won replied in English, wanting Dr. Chambers to understand the conversation. The doctor performing the procedure is the most qualified neurological specialist in America. "That black woman?" His mother's voice crackled with disdain. "You're risking everything for experimental medicine from someone with no proper credentials. Dr. Loretta Chambers has 17 published papers on neurological therapy," Ji-won interrupted, his voice growing stronger. "She developed the only treatment that can reverse my condition. She saved my life when I had a cardiac arrest, using techniques that no other doctor in the hospital understood." The silence on the line was profound. Chairwoman Park had rarely heard her son speak with such conviction about anything that contradicted her worldview. "Mother," Ji-won continued, "I was wrong. We were all wrong. I nearly died because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. Dr. Chambers is brilliant, compassionate, and completely dedicated to saving lives. She deserves respect, not the discrimination we've shown her." Dr. Chambers appeared in the doorway, ready to begin the pre-operative procedures. She had obviously heard at least part of the conversation, and her expression showed both surprise and gratitude. "I have to go now," Ji-won told his mother. "When I recover, and I believe I will recover, I hope you'll meet Dr. Chambers and see what I was too blind to recognize." He ended the call before she could respond, then looked directly at Dr. Chambers. "Doctor, I know my apology yesterday was insufficient. I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. You're not just a competent physician. You're the doctor I should have trusted from the beginning." Dr. Chambers smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "Thank you, Mr. Park. That means more than you know. Now, shall we get started on saving your life?" The operating theater deep in Mount Sinai's research wing looked more like a space station than a traditional surgical suite. Dr. Chambers had spent months designing the facility specifically for experimental neurological procedures, and every piece of equipment represented the cutting edge of medical technology. Ji-won lay on the operating table, conscious but sedated, as Dr. Chambers explained each step of the neurological pathway reconstruction protocol. The treatment required him to remain awake so she could monitor his cognitive responses in real time. "The modified cellular material will be introduced directly into your brain tissue through microinjection," Dr. Chambers explained, her hands steady as she prepared the revolutionary treatment. "You'll feel some pressure, but no pain. The process takes approximately 4 hours." Min-seo watched from the observation deck, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled anxiety. She had become more than an assistant over the years. She was the closest thing Ji-won had to family in America. Seeing him so vulnerable, his life dependent on an experimental procedure, made her realize how much she cared about her difficult boss. The first injection sent unusual sensations through Ji-won's nervous system. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper, as if his brain was awakening from a long sleep. Dr. Chambers monitored multiple screens that displayed his neural activity in real time, her trained eye catching changes that would be invisible to other physicians. "How do you feel?" she asked, adjusting the cellular introduction rate. "Different," Ji-won replied honestly. "Like something that was broken is being repaired." The second phase of treatment involved targeted electromagnetic stimulation to encourage the new cellular material to integrate with existing neural pathways. The equipment hummed with energy as Dr. Chambers orchestrated the complex procedure with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. "Your neural pathway reconstruction is proceeding better than expected," she said, unable to hide her excitement. "The damaged tissue is responding to the treatment more rapidly than in any previous case." Hours passed in careful monitoring and adjustment. Dr. Chambers never left his side, her golden skin glistening with concentration as she guided the experimental treatment through its delicate phases. She was performing medical pioneering work that would reshape neurological therapy for decades to come. As the final phase began, Ji-won felt a clarity returning to his thoughts that he hadn't experienced in weeks. The tremor in his hands was gone, his vision sharp and focused. The treatment was working, not just halting the disease, but actually reversing the damage that had seemed irreparable. "Dr. Chambers," he said quietly, "you're saving more than my life. You're restoring my faith in what medicine can accomplish." The emergency board meeting at Mount Sinai convened while Ji-won was still in recovery. Word of Dr. Chambers' unauthorized experimental treatment had spread through the hospital's administration, creating a firestorm of medical and legal concerns. Hospital attorneys paced the conference room while department heads debated the implications of allowing such radical procedures. Dr. Richardson sat at the head of the table, his authority restored now that he could position himself as the voice of medical conservatism. He had spent the morning consulting with colleagues at Harvard and Johns Hopkins, building a coalition of prestigious physicians who opposed experimental treatments. "Dr. Chambers has violated every protocol we have," Richardson declared to the assembled medical staff. "She performed an unapproved procedure on one of our most high-profile patients without proper oversight or institutional consent." The hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Patricia Hamilton, looked troubled as she reviewed the documentation. The patient did sign consent forms, and his condition was terminal under conventional treatment. "Consent doesn't matter if the treatment kills him," Richardson responded. "We're exposing the hospital to massive liability for the sake of one doctor's experimental theories." What Richardson didn't mention was his own failure during Ji-won's cardiac crisis. While Dr. Chambers had saved the patient's life using innovative techniques, Richardson had frozen, unable to adapt to a situation outside his textbook training. His opposition to her methods was as much about protecting his reputation as about medical ethics. Min Seo burst into the conference room without announcement, her professional composure abandoned in favor of fierce loyalty. "Mr. Park is awake," she announced breathlessly. "The treatment worked. His neurological function is completely restored." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Chambers had not only saved Ji-won's life, but had achieved a medical breakthrough that would revolutionize neurological therapy. The experimental treatment that Richardson had opposed as reckless had proven to be a miracle of modern medicine. Dr. Hamilton stood slowly, her expression reflecting the magnitude of what had occurred. If the treatment was successful, then Dr. Chambers has accomplished something unprecedented in neurological medicine. Richardson's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. His conservative approach, based on prestigious credentials rather than innovative thinking, had been thoroughly discredited. The woman he had dismissed as unqualified had achieved what he never could. "One success doesn't validate experimental medicine," he said defensively. "The risks were enormous. We were lucky the patient didn't die." "The patient didn't die because Dr. Chambers is the most competent neurological specialist in this hospital," Min Seo replied with unprecedented boldness. "While you were focused on protecting your reputation, she was focused on saving his life." The media explosion was inevitable. News of Park Ji-won's miraculous recovery from an experimental treatment performed by a black female doctor spread across international headlines within hours. Korean business networks buzzed with speculation about the implications for Park Industries' leadership. Ji-won sat in his hospital bed, fully recovered but facing a different kind of crisis. His phone rang constantly with calls from board members, investors, and family members demanding explanations for his medical choices. The Korean media portrayed his treatment as a scandal, focusing more on Dr. Chambers' race than her remarkable achievement. "Chaebol Air treated by unproven black doctor," screamed the headline in the Seoul Business Daily. The article questioned Ji-won's judgment and suggested that his illness might have affected his decision-making abilities. None of the coverage mentioned Dr. Chambers' 17 published papers or her groundbreaking research. Dr. Chambers entered his room carrying discharge papers, her professional demeanor intact, despite the media storm surrounding her work. She had endured similar scrutiny throughout her career, but never at this level of international attention. Every major medical journal wanted to interview her about the breakthrough treatment. "The hospital administration wants to hold a press conference," she informed Ji-won. "They're eager to take credit for the successful experimental treatment." Ji-won's jaw tightened. "After they tried to prevent you from performing the procedure? That's how institutional medicine works," Dr. Chambers replied with weary acceptance. "Innovation is discouraged until it succeeds, then it's claimed by the establishment." Min-seo knocked and entered, her tablet displaying social media feeds that ranged from celebratory to viciously racist. The online reaction to Ji-won's recovery had revealed the depth of prejudice that Dr. Chambers faced daily. Comments questioned her qualifications, her methods, and her right to treat wealthy patients. "Sir," Min-seo said carefully, "your mother has called a board meeting in Seoul. She wants you to return immediately and issue a statement distancing the company from the controversy." Ji-won stood from his hospital bed, his movements strong and confident for the first time in weeks. The experimental treatment had restored more than his neurological function. It had clarified his moral vision. He could see the choice before him with perfect clarity. "Schedule the press conference," he told Dr. Chambers. "But I want to speak first. It's time the world knew the truth about who saved my life and why that matters." The decision would cost him everything he had inherited, but Ji-won realized that some things were more valuable than family approval. The press conference at Mount Sinai drew international media attention. Cameras from major networks filled the hospital's main conference room as Ji-won prepared to make the most important statement of his life. Dr. Chambers sat beside him at the podium, her confidence unshaken by the global scrutiny. Hospital administrators had expected Ji-won to deliver conventional remarks about Mount Sinai's excellence and his gratitude for their care. They had not anticipated that he would use the platform to challenge the medical establishment's prejudices. "5 days ago, I was a dying man," Ji-won began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I had consulted with the most prestigious doctors money could buy, physicians from Harvard and Johns Hopkins with impeccable credentials." The audience listened intently as he described his initial diagnosis and prognosis. Reporters scribbled notes, their cameras focused on every word. This was the first public statement from the Korean billionaire since news of his experimental treatment had broken. "Every conventional doctor told me I had 72 hours to live," Ji-won continued. "They offered palliative care and sympathy. Only one physician in this entire hospital had the knowledge and courage to offer me a real chance at survival." He turned to Dr. Chambers, his expression showing both gratitude and profound respect. "Dr. Loretta Chambers developed an experimental treatment that not only saved my life, but completely reversed my neurological condition. She accomplished what the entire medical establishment said was impossible." Murmurs rippled through the press corps as Ji-won's endorsement became clear. This wasn't just a testimonial. It was a repudiation of medical hierarchy based on prestigious credentials rather than actual competence. "I must confess something that shames me deeply," Ji-won said, his voice dropping to a more personal tone. "When I first met Dr. Chambers, I dismissed her expertise because of my own prejudices. I saw her race and gender before I saw her brilliant mind. I nearly died because I couldn't recognize competence in someone who didn't match my preconceptions." The room fell completely silent. Such raw honesty was unprecedented from a corporate leader, especially regarding racial bias. Cameras captured every word as Ji-won continued his extraordinary confession. "Dr. Chambers is not just the doctor who saved my life," he declared, looking directly into the cameras. "She is the most competent, innovative, and dedicated physician I have ever encountered. The medical world should be learning from her, not questioning her qualifications." The applause that followed was thunderous. But Ji-won knew the real consequences would come later. In boardrooms and family meetings where his honesty would be seen as betrayal. 3 months later, Ji-won's transformation was complete. His neurological recovery had exceeded even Dr. Chambers' optimistic projections, but the personal changes ran deeper than medical healing. He had used his platform and resources to champion experimental medicine and challenge discriminatory practices in healthcare. The Park Foundation's new research initiative had committed $50 million to supporting innovative treatments for rare diseases. Dr. Chambers had been named the Foundation's chief medical officer, her experimental protocols now being studied by researchers worldwide. The basement laboratory at Mount Sinai had become a pilgrimage site for neurologists seeking to understand her breakthrough methods. Min Seo had been promoted to chief of staff, her loyalty during the crisis having proven her worth beyond traditional corporate hierarchies. She managed the Foundation's operations with the same dedication she had shown to Ji-won's recovery. Her immigrant mother had wept with pride when she learned her daughter was helping save lives across racial and economic barriers. The cost of Ji-won's transformation had been substantial. Chairwoman Park had initiated proceedings to remove him from leadership of Park Industries, citing his erratic behavior and inappropriate associations. Several board members had resigned in protest of his public statements about racial prejudice in medicine. But Ji-won felt lighter than he had in years. The signet ring that had once symbolized inherited privilege now sat in a drawer, replaced by a simple medical alert bracelet that reminded him of his mortality and humanity. He had discovered that respect earned through character was more valuable than power inherited through birth. Dr. Chambers knocked on his office door, carrying files about potential patients for the experimental program. Her research had attracted cases from around the world, people who had been written off by conventional medicine, but might be saved by innovative thinking. "Ready for the next case?" she asked, her smile reflecting the partnership they had built. Ji-won looked at the files, each representing someone facing the same despair he had experienced. "More than ready," he replied. "Let's save some lives." The experimental treatment that had saved him was now saving others, proving that the best medicine came not from prestigious institutions, but from brilliant minds willing to challenge established thinking. 1 year after his recovery, Ji-won stood before the International Congress of Neurological Medicine. The auditorium in Geneva was packed with the world's leading neurologists, many of whom had initially dismissed Dr. Chambers' experimental protocols as unproven and dangerous. Now they had come to learn from her breakthrough research. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ji-won addressed the assembly, his voice strong and clear. "I am living proof that innovation in medicine requires us to look beyond traditional hierarchies and recognize expertise wherever it exists." The irony wasn't lost on him. A businessman was lecturing medical professionals about prejudice in their own field. Dr. Chambers stepped to the podium beside him, her research now validated by dozens of successful treatments worldwide. The neurological pathway reconstruction protocol had been refined and approved by medical boards in 12 countries. Patients who had been considered terminal were walking, talking, and living full lives. The success rate has now reached 92% across all patient demographics, Dr. Chambers reported to the rapt audience. What began as experimental medicine is now recognized as the gold standard treatment for degenerative neurological conditions. Behind them on the screen were brain scans showing the remarkable recoveries achieved through her methods. Each image represented a life saved, a family kept intact, a future restored through innovative thinking. The medical establishment that had once questioned her qualifications now sought her guidance. Dr. I. Richardson sat in the third row, his expression a mixture of admiration and shame. His failure during Ji-won's crisis had prompted deep self-reflection about his own limitations and biases. He had since become an advocate for experimental medicine and a vocal supporter of Dr. Chambers' research. The lesson here extends beyond medicine, Ji-won continued, addressing not just the neurologists, but the global audience watching the live stream. Competence exists in all forms, from all backgrounds. When we allow prejudice to cloud our judgment, we don't just harm individuals, we deny ourselves access to the best solutions. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 10 minutes. In the audience, Min-seo wiped away tears of pride as she watched her former boss address the world's medical elite about the doctor they had almost ignored. The transformation from prejudiced billionaire to champion of equality had been complete. Dr. Chambers received the Congress's highest honor for medical innovation. As she held the award, Ji-won reflected on how close he had come to dying simply because he couldn't see past his own biases. The woman who saved his life had also saved his soul. 2 years post-treatment, Ji-won's life had been transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The Park Foundation had become a global leader in funding experimental medical research, particularly focusing on treatments developed by physicians from underrepresented backgrounds. His personal mission to combat medical prejudice had evolved into a worldwide movement that challenged medical establishments to recognize competence regardless of the doctor's race or gender. Dr. Chambers' laboratory had expanded into a full research institute, attracting the brightest minds in experimental medicine from around the globe. Her neurological pathway reconstruction protocol had saved over 200 lives globally, with success rates that continued to improve as the treatment was refined and adapted for different neurological conditions. Medical schools now taught case studies of her breakthrough work, and her research papers had become required reading for neurology students worldwide. The ripple effects of Ji-won's recovery story had reached far beyond individual patients. Major medical institutions were restructuring their research priorities to include experimental treatments that had previously been dismissed. The Foundation's $50 million commitment had grown to over $200 million as other philanthropists joined the movement to fund innovative medical research. Min-seo had flourished in her role as chief of staff, managing not just the Foundation's operations, but also serving as a bridge between traditional corporate culture and the new inclusive approach Ji-won championed. Her immigrant mother's pride had been featured in several documentaries about the Foundation's work, showing how prejudice affected not just patients, but entire communities. What struck Ji-won most profoundly was the cascade of recoveries that followed his own. Children with rare neurological conditions were walking again, thanks to adaptations of Dr. Chambers' protocol. Adults who had been written off by conventional medicine were returning to full, productive lives. Each success story reinforced his understanding that medical innovation required courage to challenge established thinking. The personal cost had been significant, but worthwhile. Chairwoman Park had succeeded in removing him from Park Industries' leadership, but Ji-won had discovered that building something meaningful was more satisfying than inheriting power. His relationship with his mother remained strained, though he hoped time might heal their differences. The Congressional hearing on experimental medicine drew unprecedented attention. Ji-won sat at the witness table in the packed chamber, flanked by Dr. Chambers and other medical researchers, whose innovative treatments had transformed patient outcomes. The hearing represented a crucial moment in the fight to expand access to experimental treatments for terminal patients. "Honorable members of Congress," Ji-won began, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience. "I am here today because 2 years ago, I was a dying man who nearly refused the treatment that saved my life due to my own prejudices." The chamber fell silent as he recounted his story, each word carefully chosen to illustrate the broader implications of medical bias. Dr. Chambers testified about the regulatory barriers that prevented innovative treatments from reaching patients who desperately needed them. The current approval process, while necessary for safety, often moves too slowly for terminal patients, she explained. We need pathways that allow experimental treatments to be accessed more quickly while maintaining appropriate safeguards. The questioning from committee members revealed the complexity of balancing patient access with medical safety. Some representatives worried about exposing vulnerable patients to unproven treatments, while others argued that terminal patients should have the right to try any potentially life-saving intervention. Dr. Chambers asked Representative Martinez from California, "How do we ensure that experimental treatments are offered ethically, particularly to minority patients who have historically been exploited by the medical system?" Dr. Chambers' response was measured and thoughtful. Ethical experimental medicine requires informed consent, rigorous data collection, and most importantly, ensuring that experimental treatments are developed by diverse teams of researchers who understand the communities they serve. Her golden skin seemed to glow under the chamber's harsh lights as she spoke with the authority of someone who had revolutionized neurological medicine. Ji-won watched the proceedings with intense interest, understanding that this hearing could determine whether other patients would have access to the life-saving treatments that Dr. Chambers and researchers like her were developing. The Foundation had commissioned studies showing that patients from underrepresented communities were less likely to be offered experimental treatments, even when they met all clinical criteria. The hearing's outcome would shape medical policy for decades to come. Ji-won realized that his recovery had become more than a personal miracle. It was evidence that medical innovation flourished when prejudice was abandoned, and competence was recognized regardless of its source. 3 years after his miraculous recovery, Ji-won stood before the graduating class of Mount Sinai Medical School. As the commencement speaker, he faced an audience of future doctors who would shape the next generation of medical care. His message was personal yet universal. Competence exists everywhere, and prejudice is a barrier to both healing and progress. When I first entered this hospital, Ji-won told the graduates, I believed that medical authority was determined by prestigious credentials and familiar appearances. His voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. I nearly died because I couldn't recognize brilliance in someone who didn't match my preconceptions about what a doctor should look like. Dr. Chambers sat in the front row. Her research institute now a model for experimental medicine programs worldwide. The neurological pathway reconstruction protocol had been adapted for treating multiple degenerative conditions, saving thousands of lives across every demographic. Her work had fundamentally changed how the medical community approached terminal neurological diseases. The Foundation's impact extended far beyond individual treatments. Their funding had supported breakthrough research in areas that traditional medical institutions had overlooked. Rare diseases affecting primarily minority populations, innovative treatments developed by physicians from underrepresented backgrounds, and experimental protocols that challenged conventional medical wisdom. Min Seo, now Director of Global Operations for the Foundation, had overseen the establishment of research centers in 12 countries. The Korean-American woman who had once bowed deferentially to her prejudiced boss now commanded respect in medical circles worldwide. Her transformation paralleled Ji-won's own journey from bias to enlightenment. The lesson I learned, Ji-won continued, addressing the new doctors, is that healing requires humility. His words resonated through the auditorium as graduates absorbed the implications. The moment you assume you know who can help and who cannot, you limit not just your patients' options, but your own growth as physicians. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 15 minutes. In the audience, families of patients saved by experimental treatments wept with gratitude. Dr. Richardson, who had since become an advocate for innovative medicine, applauded alongside colleagues who had learned to question their own assumptions about medical authority. As Ji-won concluded his speech, he reflected on the profound irony of his journey. The woman he had dismissed as unworthy had not only saved his life, but had taught him to see the world with clearer vision. His recovery had been physical, but his transformation had been moral, a testament to the power of confronting one's own prejudices. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Dr. Chambers' Research Institute as Ji-won reviewed the latest treatment outcomes. 537 patients had now received variations of the neurological pathway reconstruction protocol, with a success rate that continued to astound the medical community. Each recovery represented not just a scientific triumph, but a victory over the prejudices that had nearly prevented the treatment's development. Min-seo entered his office carrying reports from their satellite research centers. The Foundation's work had expanded to include funding for innovative treatments across multiple medical disciplines, always prioritizing research that challenged conventional thinking. Their mission had evolved from saving individual lives to transforming medical culture itself. "Sir," Min-seo said, though she had long since earned the right to call him Ji-won, "the final numbers are in from this year's patient outcomes." Her professional demeanor couldn't hide her excitement about the results. Ji-won smiled as he reviewed the data. Every statistic represented a human being who had been given a second chance at life because someone had been willing to look past prejudice and recognize true competence. Dr. Chambers' work had proven that innovation in medicine required courage to challenge established hierarchies. The heart monitor that had once warned of his impending death now served as a paperweight on his desk, a reminder of how close he had come to dying, not from disease, but from his own biases. The experimental treatment that saved his life had taught him that healing required more than medical skill. It demanded the humility to see beyond surface appearances to the brilliance that exists in unexpected forms. As the sun set over Manhattan, Ji-won reflected on the journey that had transformed him from a prejudiced billionaire into a champion of medical equality. Dr. Loretta Chambers had given him more than a second chance at life. She had shown him how to truly see. And in learning to see her worth, he had discovered his own capacity for growth, redemption, and the courage to challenge the prejudices that diminish us all.